INFJs are rare. They make up only about 1 to 2% of the total population. But that still means you've probably met one, since 1 in 100 or even 1 in 50 is an INFJ. But you may not know that you met one, because INFJs are also known as being chameleons. They're extremely good at adapting to and fitting into the social environment in which they are in, and making people feel like they're just like them. What does it mean to be a chameleon? And is it a matter of being inauthentic and being a people pleaser, or is it something different? So let's talk about that. So first off, what is an INFJ? INFJ is one of 16 categories of the Myers-Briggs personality type. It's important to understand that each type is made up of 4 categories or spectrums. In the case of the INFJ, they are introverted, I, which is on a spectrum between introversion and extroversion. And no one is 100% introverted or extroverted all the time. If you're in the I category, it means you just simply fall more on the introverted end of the spectrum than the extroverted. N stands for intuitive. Intuitive means that you understand things without having to think about them, without necessarily knowing how you understand them. It's not psychic, it's not a superpower. It's just that we interpret the same amount of data that you get from your senses at a subconscious level and understand it on a subconscious level. So we just kind of seem to understand things and know things before we can tell you exactly why it makes sense to us. We know when somebody's lying to us. We know when someone is in emotional pain, when they're trying to hide it. We sense these things kind of automatically. Next is feeling. Feeling versus thinking is a spectrum of using logic to make your decisions versus basing your decisions on your values and beliefs. Most people tend to use primarily logic. INFJs tend to lean more towards feeling. But again, it's a spectrum. Nobody does 100% all the time. And finally, there's judging. Judging tends to be people who like to have a plan. They like to know where things are going. They have a kind of a goal set in mind and they want to achieve that goal. Whereas perceiving people tend to be more easily go with the flow. To give you an example of the difference between judging and perceiving from one of my real life experiences that happened just this week, is I had a planned meeting at a certain time that got canceled, but I forgot to check my messages and I arrived for the meeting and no one was there. So now I had an hour and a half of time to kill before my next thing on my calendar. Most people would say, great, I got some time to kill, can do whatever. Me, this kind of threw me into a loop. It took me a minute to kind of readjust because I was really uncomfortable with this. I don't know what to do with myself. That's a judging person. That's that judging characteristic. That's the INFJ personality type. So how does this personality type become a chameleon? Well, it starts very early as children. When researchers are studying the difference between introverted children and extroverted children, one of the things they notice with introverts is they are slow to adapt to new social environments. What will happen is if you take a child, you introduce them to a group of new kids, they tend to stay on kind of the outskirts for a while. What the introverted children are doing is they're observing the social cues and the dynamics of the group. When they're ready and comfortable, they then begin to interact with the group. And they do so typically very, very well because they've already internalized the social dynamics already used in that group. So they integrate very well once they decide to integrate and they become very well liked. By the time they get to be adults, this process is automatic to them. Next comes the intuitive component. People who are intuitive, they tend to understand things that are with other people more easily. They just naturally get it. When you combine that with introversion, you very often have what's called a highly sensitive person, somebody who's extremely tuned in to the emotional cues of everybody around them. There's other parts of being highly sensitive that don't have to do with emotional cues, that have to do more with the environment, but we're not going to talk about that today. An IN person is very good at reading other people. So they see when they're happy, when they're sad, when they're hiding things, when they're maybe feeling down and saying, oh, I'm fine, but trying to brush things off, that say, oh, that doesn't really matter, when in fact they feel it very deeply. And will respond to it. They feel empathy, so they feel what this other person is feeling, and they're gonna go with that. They're gonna lean into that because they want that other person to feel seen, to feel heard. Because also being empathetic, we understand what it feels like when people don't understand us. So we want to give that person the comfort of feeling understood. So that's what happens when you combine introversion and intuition. So when you combine these two traits, these are people who understand the world and the pain and the joy of everyone around them on a level that tends to be much deeper than the average person to begin with. So now we're going to jump past the feeling into the judgment. INFJs have deeply held values and beliefs. They tend to be things that we have thought about and come to believe, and they don't necessarily line up with the standard values of everyone around us. And so we learn growing up that when you're different from other people, you get treated differently, bullied, you get ostracized. And so we learn to hide these things, to just tamp them down, not express them. But it doesn't mean we don't feel them or believe them. We just learn to not express them. And this is important because not expressing them is not the same thing as changing them or hiding them. It's simply just not voicing that opinion, that belief, that value.